I will. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Get rid of these. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. If Beowulf is written sometime around the 10th century about events that took place 400 years earlier, this is written in Anglo-Saxon. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is also medieval literature, but it comes after the Norman Conquest. The Norman Conquest takes place in 1066. William the Conqueror comes up from Normandy, invades Anglo-Saxon Britain, and brings with him the languages of the French court, and it transforms, among other things, the English language. So by the time we get to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, we don't speak Anglo-Saxon anymore, we speak what they call Middle English. If you read it in the original, which you can, you will recognize some of it. It'll sound a little bit odd, but you can actually comprehend Middle English. It helps have a little translation here or there. And it has some of the features of Anglo-Saxon insofar as, just like German, every syllable and vowel is pronounced. They don't have silent vowels, just like German. But you would recognize this. And this is not an epic that we're about to read. I should also hasten to add. And I say that because it begins by talking about Troy, so you might think it is an epic. But it is not an epic. It's a romance, a chivalric romance. And a romance is different from an epic insofar as, even though it deals with the supernatural, both of them, a romance deals with just an episode, a short passage or story that is meaningful, but it's not meant to be comprehensive. It's not meant to be encyclopedic. It doesn't teach you everything about the afterlife. It doesn't teach you about the nature of the underworld or of heaven. It doesn't teach you everything about living a good life. It's an episode, and in this case, it's around one of the knights of King Arthur's Round Table. So this is the time of Arthurian romances. And they're called romances for a reason, because they have something romantic about them. The supernatural, wondrous, magical. And at the heart of it is the notion of chivalry. Now, what do you know about the word chivalry? Yes?
It's a code of ethics?
Yeah, a code of honor. And it is associated with the chevalier, the horseman, French cheval. And by this point, the horse is not just a horse, he is a noble steed. He's been translated in some ways and associated with honor and Christian conduct. So, because it's not just a battle between good and evil, it's a battle between those who profess allegiance to Christ and those who don't. But even amongst those who profess allegiance to Christ, there are tournaments that take place. We know these as tournaments or jousts. And the belief is that not that the strongest wins, but that the most holy wins the fight. So the most virtuous. So there's an understanding of manliness that has now been translated by Christ's humanity, into something related to his moral conduct and not just his physical actions. And so regularly the knight, the man of honor, professes allegiance to Christ and then acts in accordance with what he would expect Christian conduct to be. And one of those things associated with the court is courtesy. So this is very interesting. Do I have a marker here that will work? I don't know. In Greek times, we had the polis, from which we get the English word politics. In Latin, we had the city, or civitas, from which we get civilized, civilization. Now we got the Christian notion of the epicenter of civilization, which is the court, from which we get courtesy. This is the conduct, and this will be English, I guess, of a type of ethical conduct or a type of behavior that is associated with the different realms of study here. It's not worth bothering with this. Should have written it on here behind me. But as I say, in the Greek age, there was the polis, and I remember when we looked at the republic, which I said was actually the polis in Greek, translated as the republic. There was a certain notion of the individual, the city's notion of justice being a microcosm, or rather a macrocosm, of the individual notion of justice. What is it like to be a just man? Plato says, well, let's look at a city, and I'll demonstrate what justice is like in the city. And then from that, you'll be able to make an analogy for what it's like to be a just man. To be a just man is to have your reason ruling over your passions through means of your virtues, through your chest. That's what it means. Not allowing your passions to overrule. Just like Plato or Homer always is appealing to our passions. He moves us to love certain things, but is it ruled by justice at all times? And the answer is no. Homer is regularly depicting injustice, even amongst the gods. Well, that isn't correct. So there's an element of that. Same thing goes on in Virgil's Aeneid. And here in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, we have the same sort of dynamic surrounding the court. We have courtiers, those that surround the court, courtesans. All of these are surrounding the seat of power, which is represented by the court. And remember, in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, it's King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, represents the Golden Age. It's a legendary time when sin has been defeated, when we've got to something like we saw in Virgil's Aeneid, a return to a golden age, the realm of the heroes, when sin has been put down and put in its place, and Christian conduct is modeled everywhere, and darkness and sin is defeated by those who are allied to Christ. So it's a shift to a more moral plane of endeavor. We don't get that in the polis. The polis, morality is not the foremost consideration, nor is it in civilization, in the civitas of the Romans. It's not morality. It's not that they're immoral, but it's not morality that's the main consideration, whereas now it really is. It's the kingdom of righteousness that is in the midst of this court. And the knight represents the court. And of all of the knights of the court, the greatest of the knights is Sir Gawain. That's how he's presented in this little romance. Sir Gawain is represented as the perfect Christian knight, representing the perfect Christian court. Camelot, or is it sometimes known as Logres? But Camelot, you know about Camelot, it's still referred to. Very popular. By the way, from the 19th century on, there's a resurgence of interest in King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and the realm of Camelot. Right at the time the British have their empire and take on global significance as a global power. The English suddenly have empire thrust upon them. How do we act? We'll act in accordance with knightly realms. And note that the British knight, they have knights of the realm and so forth. Honors and titles that are expected to act in a certain way. Act like a gentleman. Right? That's because they recognize that virtue is needed to govern, not just power. The Romans aren't interested in virtue per se. They will rule through the force of the military. But they won't act in accordance with right. Whereas here in Sir Gawain, we certainly have that. So this is a chivalric romance. It's written in Middle English, and it's written in alliterative verse, just like we saw with the Beowulf. A lot of alliteration. So every line will be alliterated at least 3 times. the siege and the assault being ceased at Troy. Note this doesn't have to be at the beginning of the word. The battlements broken down and burnt to brands and ashes. 4 of them there. And you'll find throughout the entire poem, alliteration is found in every line. When you think of poetry, we tend to think of rhyme as in the end of the line. That's not how Middle English tends to work. It doesn't work through rhyme. It works, or at least not end rhyme, it works through middle rhyme, the rhyme of alliteration. So there isn't, a rhymed part of it. It's in the same way that that contemporary music, to some degree, does that. I don't want to say rap, but rap goes in that as well. There's a lot of syncopated rhythms and deliberate consonantal repetitions and so forth. Not just the rhyme at the end. The rhyme at the end sounds a little too dainty, a little bit too polite, a little too pretty to the Anglo-Saxon and the Middle English ear. They want something a little more English, and this is how it comes out. And it begins, as I said to you, with Troy, which might lead you to think this is another epic. And it's, as I say, it's not an epic, but it harkens back to that epic, to that battle that we've seen dominates the whole first semester of your studies here. The battle at Troy. Let me just read the first line. First Fitt, rather. There are 4 fits, by the way, 4 parts. So F-I-T-T, there are 4, parts. And this is the first one. And you'll see that it has a certain verse quality that I'll comment on in a second. Let me just read it then. The siege and the assault being ceased at Troy, the battlements broken down and burnt to brands and ashes, the treacherous trickster whose treasons there flourished was famed for his falsehood. The foulest on earth, Aeneas, the noble and his knightly kin, then conquered kingdoms and kept in their hand well nigh all the wealth of the western lands. Royal Romulus to Rome first turned, set up the city in splendid pomp, then named her with his own name, which now she still has. Ticius founded Tuscany, townships raising, Longbeard in Lombardy lifted up homes. And far over the French flood, Felix Brutus on many spacious slopes set Britain with joy and grace. Where war and feud and wonder have ruled the realm of space, and after bliss and blunder by turns have run their race. Now you'll note that we get the connection between Troy to Rome to Tuscany, where Dante writes his Divine Comedy. That's in Tuscany, where Florence is. And now finally to Britain. And and it's made in one little introduction here. And note that they're on the side of the Romans. And there's a reference to the traitor or the deceiver, or how is he presented? The trickster famed for his falsehood, none other than Odysseus. So the hero for the Greeks is the villain for the Romans. And we're on side with that. And Brutus, who slew Julius Caesar, is not the Brutus in thought here, but Felix Brutus rather. And Felix Brutus is the grandson or great-grandson of Aeneas and considered to be the founder of Britain. So connection there. And interestingly with that, remember what I said about Aeneas's god. Who's Aeneas's favored god? Who favors Aeneas among the gods? Venus, goddess of love, erotic love, romantic love. Same with the British then. If the founder of the Romans was Venus and Felix Brutus is the great-grandson of Aeneas, the founder of Britain, the British are also going to be marked by the same connection with romantic love, eros. And be subject to the same failings. Now, when we write this, there's a difference between the account in the Aeneid and this account, and that is because we've brought into the consideration something I've already discussed about in relation to Dante, namely the courtly love tradition. And the courtly love tradition has certain conventions for it, and one of them is that a knight will fall for his social superior, a queen, an empress, whatever. But it's a social superior, and there's a love connection there, and it's an adulterous one at that. That's part of the courtly love tradition. And famously, and we read about this when we looked at Dante's, the fifth canto of the Inferno, that's exactly what was going on when Paolo and Francesca committed their adulterous affair. They were reading about Lancelot and Guinevere. The Queen Guinevere and Lancelot, one of the Knights of the Round Table, they had an adulterous affair, and it destroyed the whole of King Arthur's kingdom. Right? Well, here's another figure from that same kingdom, Sir Gawain, but Sir Gawain is known for his faithfulness, for his troth. Use that word troth again. Part of courtesy is this word troth, T-R-O-W-T-H. There's going to be a great deal of significance placed on troth in this. Being truthful, being faithful, being loyal, swearing oaths and sticking by them. And being faithful to your oath, it doesn't only mean being faithful to King Arthur, it's going to mean being faithful to Christ. And there are certain expectations in the realm of Eros that are expected of Christians, and the chief of them is that you will be celibate and chaste until you're married. There's a context for sexual activity, and it's that of marriage. And that's it. But the courtly love tradition is playing with all of that at this time. And Sir Gawain, the author of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, again, we don't know who the author is, it knows that courtly love, those courtly love conventions are around, and he's going to play with those in his demonstration of Sir Gawain's adventures here. But I'm just getting ahead of myself a little bit, perhaps. Oh gosh, these things need to go away. Final thing. You note that it concluded here with these lines, a shorter passage. It's called a bob and wheel in terms of the structure. It's called a bob and wheel, and what it does is it concludes one little episode and it swings it into the next one, and it's in a sort of rhyme: wonder and blunder, space and race. So A, B, B, A, B, A, B. It tightens it, so it's got a little tight, neat finish. That concludes it. It's like a refrain in a song, except it's not repeated, so it's not like a refrain. But the bob and wheel structure is repeated, and so each little episode numbered here will conclude with this sort of bob and wheel structure. So it's artfully told, and you'll find it's a delightfully told at that. So that way they set the stage here. And where do we go from there? And when this Britain was built by this brave noble, here bold men bred, in battle exulting, stirs of trouble in turbulent times, here many a marvel, more than in other lands, has befallen by fortune since that far time. But of all who abode here of Britain's kings, Arthur was highest in honor, as I have heard. So I intend to tell you of a true wonder, which many folk mention as a manifest marvel, a happening eminent among Arthur's adventures. Listen to my lay but a little while. Straightway shall I speak it, in city as I heard it, with tongue. As scribes have said it duly, as in the lore of the land so long, with letters linking truly, in story bold and strong. So the poet is warming to his story, and now he's gone from the story of Troy and the founding of Britain to the most famous king of Britain and now pulls us right in. It very swiftly connects us right away to the story. There's no bandying about, no delays. And the king is Arthur, and this king lay at Camelot. One Christmas tide, with many mighty lords, many liegemen, members rightly reckoned of the round table. In splendid celebration, seemly and carefree, they're tussling in tournament time and again, jousted in jollity these gentle knights, then in court carnival sang catches and dance. For 15 days the feasting there was in full like measure, with all the meat and merrymaking men could devise. Gladly ringing glee, glorious to hear. A noble din by day, dancing at night. Always happiness in the height in halls and chambers for lords and their ladies, delectable joy. With all delights on earth they housed there together, saving Christ's self, the most celebrated knights, the loveliest ladies to live in all time, and the comeliest king ever to keep court. For his fine fellowship was in its fair prime far famed. Famed, acclaimed, named. Will and Hill. And so there's a fivefold, the rhyme 1, 3, 5, and then between. Far famed. Stood well in heaven's will, its high-souled king acclaimed, so hardy a host on hill could not with ease be named. So we get a portrait of the golden age, a golden Christian age. The kingdom of God has come on earth. That's what it appears. Right at the center of the court, there's an allegiance to Christ that is represented above all others by the king himself. And the knights of the round table, who's have a sort of a, even though they're a nobility, they don't act like they're above one another. There's sort of equity. They're around the table, all their swords, and there's an equality. And King Arthur's the first among equals. That's how he governs himself. Not the way we see in Beowulf, where there's the king and the vassals. Here there seems to be more parity amongst the Knights of the Round Table. So it's Christmas tide and about the turn of the new year. And this is telling, because of course the Christmas is the miracle of the incarnation, celebrating that. Remember, don't think of Santa Claus and any of that banana nonsense here. We're talking about as a Christian festival, although there are elements of paganism in it as well, you'll see, but it's not Santa. No Santa, no Santa, no candy, none of that stuff. But you do get paganism festivals being there in the backdrop. I'll come to that in a bit. But the year being so young that yester even saw its birth, the day double on the dais where the diners served, mass sung, and service ended straight from the chapel, the king and his company, called Noel was newly announced, named time and again, and New Year's gifts, and everything that the wealth at the time could buy. Fairest of form was this queen, glinting and gray of eye. No man could say he had seen a lovelier, but with a lie. So Guinevere, the most beautiful of all. And it's a miraculous golden time. But, and we just saw like at the conclusion of Beowulf, a sort of time where a good king had ruled for 50 years, and then there comes the big but, and here's the but here as well. So it's all a portrait of, sweetness and light, but Arthur would not eat until all were served. That's fine. He's putting others ahead of himself. Christ-like, okay. He was charming and cheerful, childlike and gay, and loving active life. Little did he favor lying down for long or lolling on a seat, so robust his young blood and his beating brain. Still, he was stirred now by something else. His noble announcement that he never would eat on such a fair feast day till informed and full of some unusual adventure, as yet untold, of some momentous marvel that he might believe about ancestors or arms or other high theme, or till a stranger should seek out a strong knight of his to join with him in jousting, in jeopardy to lay life against life, each allowing the other the favor of fortune, the fairer lot. Such was the king's custom when he kept court, at every fine feast among his free retinue in hall. So he throve amid the throng, a ruler, royal, and tall, all tall, still standing, staunch and strong, and young like the year withal. What's going on here? Do you spot the problem here? Yes.
He seeks entertainment?
Yes. And he seeks some sort of miracle. He wants a manifestation, a marvel. It's not just he wants to be entertained, although I think you're right. There's something really sort of childlike and immature about this Arthur. He's not very wise, as he said. He seems like a bit of a fool. But also remember, this is Christmas time. This is the time when God becomes man. It's the miracle of Christmas. And he wants to see a miracle before he's going to eat. He's not doing it because he's putting others ahead of himself. He's doing it because he wants proof of some miracle, as if Christmas itself is not that he could believe. In other words, he's presented as basically being an unbeliever. In the midst of all of the apparent Christianity, there's a rottenness right in the center of it all. Now, this is not the way it's presented in Malory, the Mort d'Arthur, and so forth, but it is for this poet. There's a critique of Arthur here and the center of the kingdom and the apparent Christian conviction that he espouses at any rate. But erect stood the strong king. So yes, good. The strong king, stately of mien and his demeanor, his looks, trifling time with talk before the topmost table. Good Gawain was placed at Guinevere's side, and Agravain of the hard hand sat on the other side, both the king's sister's sons, staunchest of knights. Above Bishop Baldwin began the board, and Ewain, Urien's son, next to him, and they were all there, and they are all singing and being merry, and they eat, and lo and behold, section 7, suddenly Arthur gets what he's after. He wants a marvel. He wants something exciting. He wants something different. He wants a challenge. He's not going to eat till something comes about. And there, right into the midst of the hall, comes none other than the Green Knight. Barely had the blast of a trump abated 1 minute, and the first course in the court been courteously served, when there heaved in the hall door an awesome fellow, who in height outstripped all earthly men. From throat to thigh he was so thick-set and square, his loins and limbs were so long and so great, that he was half a giant on earth, I believe. Yet mainly and most of all a man he seemed, and the handsomest of horsemen, though huge at that. For though at back and at breast his body was broad, his hips and his haunches were elegant and small. So he looks like Superman on a horse, except he's green. And perfectly proportioned were all the parts of the man as seen. Men gaped at the hue of him, ingrained in garb and mien, a fellow fiercely grim, and all a glittering green. And garments of green girt the fellow about, a 2/3 length tunic, tight at the waist, a comely cloak on top, accomplished with lining, the finest fur to be found, made of one piece, marvelous fur trim material with matching hood, lying back from his locks and laid on his shoulders, fitly held up hose in hue the same green that was caught at the calf, with clinking spurs beneath. He is dressed up like a Green Knight. And above all, he's sitting on top of a huge green horse. At that, with stirrups, and similar in hue to the sight, green and huge of grain, mettlesome in might, and brusque with bit and rein, a steed to serve that knight. And even worse than that, with his big bushy beard and so forth, he holds weapons. He doesn't have a hauberk. He doesn't have a chest protector on. He doesn't have a helmet on. He doesn't have any armor, shield armor for fight. He doesn't have a shield. He doesn't have a spear. But he's got a holly cluster in one hand, and he's got a battle axe, a Danish battle axe in the other. Two-headed and enormous. But he's not dressed out for war, aside from the big battle axe. The big battle axe is pretty ominous. But he doesn't look like he's ready for battle because he doesn't have the helmet, he doesn't have a shield, he doesn't have plate to protect him in the case of a thrust and so forth. An axe, a hideous helmet smasher for anyone to tell. The head of that axe was an L-rod long, of green hammered gold, and steel was the socket. So on he goes, and everyone, and then he speaks. And what does he say? He gave no one a greeting, so he's rude, he's abrupt, he's not courteous. And he says, who and where is the governor of this gathering? By the way, King Arthur's sitting right at the table, the head of the table. It's a round table, but the head of it, it's obvious who the king is. And he acts like he doesn't know. So he's deliberately trying to provoke him. Who and where is the governor of this gathering? Gladly would I behold him with my eyes and have speech with him. He frowned, took note of every knight as he ramped and rode around, then stopped to study who might be the noble most renowned. The assembled folks stared, long scanning the fellow, for all men marveled what it might mean that a horseman and his horse should have such a color as to grow green as grass, and greener yet, it seemed, more gaudily glowing than green enamel on gold. So they are astonished, and therefore a phantom from fairyland the folk there deemed him. For even the doughty, that is the courageous, were daunted and dared not reply, all sitting stock still, astounded by his voice. Though the high hall was a hush like death, suddenly, if all had slipped into sleep, their voices were at rest, hushed, not wholly for fear, but at some honor's behest. But let him whom all revere greet that gruesome death. Guest, rather. For Arthur sensed an exploit before the high dais. Well, he's got his wish. And accorded him courteous greeting. No craven he, saying to him, Sir Knight, you are certainly welcome. I am head of this house. Arthur is my name. Please deign to dismount and dwell with us till you impart your purpose at a proper time. Very polite, very courteous. He'd just been snubbed, acted as if he didn't know who he was. You still treat him with courtesy. What's the response? May he that sits in heaven help me, said the knight, but my intention was not to tarry in this turreted hall, but as your reputation, royal sir, is raised up so high, and your castle and cavaliers are accounted the best, the mightiest of mail-clad men in mounted fighting, the most warlike, the worthiest the world has bred, most valiant to vie with in virile contests, and as chivalry is shown here, so I am assured. At this time, I tell you that has attracted me here. By this branch that I bear, you may be certain that I proceed in peace. Now, the branch is a holly branch. You know what? Holly is a pagan fertility symbol. It's a symbol of, it's evergreen. You have, we hang it at Christmas time, Yuletide. It is connected with paganism. You might think it's also associated with, and maybe this is in the background of the author here as well, the story of the Norse story of Balder and the slaying of Balder with a holly bob. So it's apparently a peace offering, but there's something insidious potentially about this peace offering. So he's got an axe in the one hand. This is pretty dangerous, but the one that appears like a peace offering may be worse. I don't know if that's in the mind of the author here or not, but it occurs to me. But this is the sign that I bear, proceed in peace, no peril seeking. For had I fared forth in fighting gear, my hauberk and helmet both at home, now my shield and sharp spear, all shining bright, and other weapons to wield, I would have brought. However, as I wish for no war here, I wear soft clothes. For if you are as bold and as brave men affirm, you will gladly grant me the good sport I demand. By right, then Arthur answer gave, if you, most noble knight, unarmored combat crave, will fail you not in fight. No, it's not combat I crave, for come to that. On this bench, only beardless boys are sitting. If I were hasp and armor on a high steed, no man among you could match me, your might being meager. For I crave in this court a Christmas game, for it is Yuletide and New Year, and young men abound here. If any in this household is so hardy in spirit, of such mettlesome mind, and so madly rash as to strike a strong blow in return for another, I shall offer to him this fine axe freely. This axe, which is heavy enough to handle as he please, and I shall bide the first blow, as bare as I sit here. If some intrepid man is tempted to try what I suggest, let him leap toward me and lay hold of this weapon, acquiring clear possession of it, no claim from me ensuing. Then shall I stand up to his stroke, quite still on this floor, so long as I shall leave to launch a return blow unchecked, yet he shall have a year and a day's reprieve, I direct. Now, hasten and let me hear who answers and to what effect. So if you didn't understand the English here, we're about to have a beheading game. And what's more to the point is you get to hit first. Here's the axe. Take off my head. One condition. In a year and a day, it's my turn. Now, what a game is that? Take a man's head off, it's over. The game's done. Your enemy's defeated. But if the terms of the game are that, yes, you get to strike him first, but then in a year and a day you have to suffer the same, then you're wondering what's going on here. This is not a good game. There's something evil about this game. If he had astonished them at the starts, yet stiller now were the henchmen in hall, both high and low, and the rider wrenched himself round in his saddle, rolled his red eyes about roughly and strangely, bending his brows, and set his beard swaying as he strained to see who would rise. When none came to accord with him, he coughed aloud. What is this Arthur's house, the honor of which is bruited abroad so abundantly, is noised about? Has your pride disappeared, your prowess gone, your victories, your valor, your vaunts? Where are they? The revel and renown of the Round Table is now overwhelmed by a word from one man's voice. For all flinch for fear from a fight not begun. Upon this he laughed so loudly that the Lord grieved. His fair features filled with blood for shame. He raged as roaring gale. His followers felt the same. The king, not one to quail, to that cavalier then came. So his pride has been provoked. He's been pricked. Like, who would do such a crazy game? Well, somebody whose pride is so great that he's willing to throw his life away. That's Arthur. By heaven, then, said Arthur, what you ask is foolish, but as you firmly seek folly, find it you shall. No good man here is aghast at your great words. Hand me your axe now, for heaven's sake, and I shall bestow the boon you bid us give. He sprang towards him swiftly, seized it from his hand, and fiercely the other fellow footed the floor. Now Arthur had his axe, and holding it by the haft, swung it about sternly as if to strike with it. The strong man stood before him, stretched to his full height, higher than any in the hall by a head and more. Stern of face, he stood there stroking his beard, turning down his tunic in a tranquil manner, less unmanned and dismayed by the mighty strokes than if a banqueter at the bench had brought him a drink of wine. That's not good. That is not good. Then Gawain at Guinevere's side bowed and spoke his design. Before all, King, confide this fight to me. may it be mine. Courtesy. Courtesy. The courteous Green Knight coming in on his foolish king's behalf, take on the fight on his own head. The beheading game begun. He's done it out of humility. He's done it for the service of others. He's going to lay down his life for his friends. At what we would expect from Gawain. If you would be worthy, Lord, said Gawain to the king, bid me stir from the seat and stand beside you, allowing me without lese majesté to leave the table, and if my liege lady were not displeased thereby, I would come there to counsel you before this court of nobles, for it appears unmeet to me, as manners go, when your hall hears uttered such a haughty request, though you gladly agree for you to grant it yourself, when on the benches about you many such bold men sit under heaven, I hold the highest medal, there being no braver knights when battle is joined. I am the weakest, the most wanting in wisdom. I know. And my life, if lost, would be least missed, truly. So what does Gawain think of himself? Nothing. Little. He thinks of himself, he's the least of all the knights. Arthur's the king. This is Christian courtesy. Nobody's going to miss me if I die in this battle. Let me do it. So he demonstrates right from the outset a reverence for Christ insofar as he thinks little of himself in this situation. Note and contrast this with Beowulf. Beowulf's very different. There's a pride that motivates him from the beginning and still here, which is also true of King Arthur. Not so of here. We have the Christian knight in front of us, and he offers to take it on. The king accepts his offer and now kneels before him. And before this happened, the Green Knight acknowledges him. By God, Sir Gawain, I rejoice that I shall have from your hand what I've asked for here. And you have gladly gone over in good discourse the covenant I requested of the king in full. What is that? I will come to wherever you live in a year and a day, and I'll take back what you give to me here. He swears by it. And he then goes and does it. Oops. Stands on the ground, takes a swing, off the head goes. Blood sprays to the ground, yet the fellow did not fall, nor falter one whit, but stoutly sprang forward on legs still sturdy, roughly reached out among the ranks of nobles, seized his splendid head, and straightway lifted it. Then he strode towards his steed, snatched the bridle, stepped into the stirrup, swung aloft, holding his head in his hand by his hair. He settled himself in the saddle as steadily as if nothing had happened to him, though he had no head. He twisted his trunk about, that gruesome body that bled. He caused much dread and doubt by the time his say was dead. For he held the head in his hand upright, pointed the face at the fairest in fame on the dais, and it lifted its eyelids and looked glaringly and menacingly, said with its mouth, as you now may hear, be prepared to perform what you promised, Gawain. Seek faithfully till you find me, my fine fellow, according to your oath, your troth, in this hall, if in these knights' hearing. Go to the Green Chapel without gainsaying to get such a stroke as you struck. Strictly you deserve that due redemption on the day of New Year. As the Knight of the Green Chapel I am known to many. Therefore, if you ask for me, I shall be found. So come or else be called coward accordingly. Then he savagely swerved, sawing at the reins, rushed out the hall door, his head in his hand, etc. It's like the story of Ichabod Crane. It's over. The Knight of Red Courage, if you ever seen it, like picked up in American folklore as well. But he goes out, and all of them are struck. This is the end of the first Fitt, by the way. All of them are struck by what's happened. They are terrified by what's happened, but they go back to pretending as if nothing has happened. Go back cheering, but they all know as the seasons progress, we're getting closer to that day. And it's like, oh, okay, oh dear, that's not good. Oh, drink. Cheers, hooray. Sir Gawain, you're a fine fellow. Okay, I'll come back next time and we'll conclude the final 3 Fitts. Please read on ahead. You will delight in it. It's a fantastic work. If you haven't got through it yet, please do. And as I say, you will not be disappointed.